Hi, I'm Rosemary Tigi, Head of Community at Claris, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our panel on performance optimization with FileMaker and FileMaker Cloud. Our Director of Product Management, Rick Kalman, will be leading this panel of Claris engineers and performance experts from the community. Before we get started, I just have a few notes about Webex for you. First, we recommend that you listen using your computer audio and that you shut down other applications that draw bandwidth. One thing that we have learned today as we're going through Claris Engage is that only the first 1,000 or so attendees will see panelist video. Everyone else will see gray boxes with initials. We are doing our best to work around this problem, but it seems to be a limitation of the platform. The sessions are all being recorded, and we expect the video from all the panelists will be available in the recordings. If you need any technical support from Webex, please contact them directly using the phone number for the US or the linked international numbers that have been dropped into the chat. And one other note on the chat, for best performance of Webex and to minimize distractions to our panels, we have disabled the two-way Webex chat. But we know you will want to ask questions of this panel. To do that, you can ask your question in the Webex events console in the lower right. If you have a question, please address it, enter it into that box, and then send it directly to me, and I will refer questions to the panelists. We hope to have time at the end of the discussion to take some questions from the audience, and we'll do our best to do that. And finally, on video, you can switch between single presenter and grid view by using the little square icon that's in the upper right. So with that, I'd like to welcome Rick Kalman, Claris Product Management, to introduce the panel. Rick, the virtual microphone is yours.
Thank you, Rosemary, and welcome everyone to our panel on performance optimization for FileMaker and FileMaker Cloud. As Rosemary said, I'm Rick Kalman, Director of Product Management for the Claris FileMaker platform. I'll be your moderator today. Joining me on the panel are Mark Richman from Skeleton Key, Nick Lightbody of Deskspace Systems Limited, and from Claris we have Lucy Chen, who's our VP of Engineering for the FileMaker platform, along with the best of our FileMaker and server resources. Clay Makel, who is our Chief FileMaker Architect. Guest star, John Thatcher, one of our original server architects, is joining us. Wei Ju, who is a FileMaker server and security architect for Claris. Yi Chang, who is a server development manager. And Masao Aoto and Connor Brock from QA, who are key testers for our platform. Believe it or not, this panel has over 150 years of experience with FileMaker. But why I'm the only one with gray hair, I don't know. Some of the topics we're going to cover today: FileMaker performance optimization tips, the role of hardware and what it plays in performance tuning, LAN versus WAN, performance considerations, how to best optimize for the cloud, and how to optimize for FileMaker WebDirect and mobile with FileMaker Go. So, happy everyone's here. And it'd be great to have you, Mark Richman, kick us off and give us a little bit of background for your company, Skeleton Key, and how you approach the topic of performance optimization, particularly in the cloud. So over to you, Mark. And you may be muted. There you go.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. It's great to be amongst such a great panel of esteemed engineers. I'm really excited to see some of the folks who've joined us sort of by surprise. I'm not sure if I've lost some kind of connection. Are you still seeing me? There we go.
Yeah, you're good.
So anyway, I'm going to give a simple answer. We're pretty pragmatic around here at Skeleton Key. We have such a mix of developers with varying skills, from junior developers to senior, and we work on such a range of systems, both complex and simple. I really feel like it comes down to some of the sort of basics. And these are things I would really attribute to having learned from John back in 2009. And I had some Cisco networking and engineering experience before, and so I came with kind of a developer network engineer mindset when I started developing and learning about how FileMaker really works. So I think it boils down to four things. Good data modeling. So it means understanding relational theory and having some basic understanding of how to build relational databases, period, and understanding how you can make smaller, more narrow tables or use joins like one-to-one joins. Understanding how FileMaker moves data, and so smart data management, understanding what makes records move, understanding the exact way that records move between the client and the server, making sure you're not triggering data unnecessarily, and in particular, something we couldn't do back then, but which we can do now, leveraging perform script on server whenever you can. Keeping the UI simple, uncluttered layouts that are easier to use for users and easier to load and render for the various clients. And then, of course, something we didn't have back in 2009, but something that is now available to us using themes. So you have more efficient performance at the layout level. And then finally, I think a really important one that I would tip the hat to a lot of other people in the community, and that's planning. Building your solutions with the when in mind, performing development and testing in a simulated environment with the right kind of data and the right kind of load. So you're not just building locally on your machine and then being surprised when you get into the wild. I feel like if we can get any of our developers of any skill level to learn those 4 basic principles and to really make sure they lay those foundations on any solution, everything else we do is icing on the cake.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mark. And Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you next and give us a bit of a background of your company. And then where do you suggest that a Claris FileMaker user, how do you suggest they can make the best performance gains when they're building their custom apps? You're on mute, Nick.
Right. Thanks, Rick, and thanks for having me. Back in the day, I was an attorney, and I wanted to run my business more efficiently. Somebody introduced me to FileMaker, and in 1997, I started creating something to build my own firm, to manage my own firm. And I think I can probably say, and I think I've said this to John Thatcher in the past, I must have made every single mistake you can ever make as a FileMaker developer. I learned the hard way. Although I had a background in computing way back with ICL mainframes in the 70s, I was seduced by the ease with which FileMaker enabled you to do stuff very easily when you got started. And what I learned the hard way is that you've got to be really careful about what you ask FileMaker to do to get the best out of it over WAN. So when you build an app, you're creating an element in a machine, but that machine comprises hardware, network, user load, and the thing you actually can build in FileMaker, which is the actual app, the solution, and its complexity. And all those different components are going to work together. And although you can control the content of the app most easily, you need to bear in mind what you're trying to ask FileMaker to do. So the starting point for me, eventually, when I learned my lessons, are that you have to think about what FileMaker is good at, and you have to try and ask it to do as little as possible. So a really good example there is that when you start building your system, FileMaker will automatically index everything in the site. All the fields all get indexed automatically. Fantastic. If you use other systems, you appreciate that convenience. But of course, you don't necessarily need to index all those fields, and any given file can easily become 5 times the size as it gets indexed. So what you need to do is to turn off the things you don't need. So if we say that hardware is giving you the power to solve solutions, that the network is going to try and slow things down, and if you then divide those 2 components and say you've then got to apply load, which is users, and also the complexity of your solution, you've got those 4 different things you can change. And a really good example, going back a few years now, but something that most FileMaker developers will have come across, is the situation where people create a multiplicity of relationships in their system in order to create some form of report. The classic one, I can remember sitting with a friend in Campbell, not far from Santa Clara in the Bay Area, and looking at her system, and I think she had 52 relationships, 1 for every week of the year, to create reports, and maybe there are other ones that somebody had 365 relationships just to get 1 for every day. Now, when FileMaker introduced what I call the FMQL query, that meant you could dispense with all of those relationships and do the thing in a different way. And the point is, FileMaker will automatically evaluate everything that can be seen from the context of the layout and hence the table occurrence upon which you are currently sitting. And that's fantastic, because if you've built other systems, you know you have to tell it to do stuff. FileMaker does it for you. But if you give it a multiplicity of different things to evaluate, that will take time, because the laws of physics dictate, don't they, Rick? You can't get, you can't put more and more jobs into the thing and still have it coming out fast. So simplicity, ultimately, it's about simplicity. It's about looking at what you actually need and taking out all the things you don't need in order to give FileMaker the ability to look really, really fast. And I've built stuff that is super fast, doing a lot of stuff, using FileMaker's strengths, but avoiding doing the stuff that you can do, but it's just really not a good idea over WAN. And I'm sure that our experts here are going to give us a long list of all those things you shouldn't be doing.
So thanks for that intro into this topic, Nick. Now that we're in a cloud-first era, and WAN environments are far more common than they used to be back in the day. Masao, I'm going to start with you with this question, and then I think it will naturally probably go over to John as well. But one of the questions we have is, how do you know what operations are done on the client and server side, and how do you optimize for the WAN? You're muted, Masao.
Sorry, I was muted. So in the FileMaker, some of the operation done by the client side, and also the server side when you open the remote file. The find operation, this is done by the server side. However, if you use some type of the calculation function, still we send some information to client information to the server, and they still perform on the server side. However, some sort operation, the replace field contents, this is required to have the data, record data. So that data is downloaded to the client side and then do the perform. So this is something slow down when you process the file on the one network. So this is a place maybe you can optimize to make a solution perform faster. So do the replace field contents operation on the server side. So use the perform script on the server script that you can send the operation on the server side to offload some task on the client.
Great, thanks, Masao.
I think okay.
Keep going. Go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, so I think John have more information about what the operation done by the client side and the server side and how to optimize. He did it on great the presentation back in year 2007.
Yeah. So hey, John, I'm sure you've forgotten more than most of us will ever know about server performance, and you've done some very well received over the years under the hood sessions. So what is your advice regarding this topic?
Well, hi, Rick and everyone. I'm back working on FileMaker temporarily, not permanently. And if those of you who don't know me, I worked for Claris starting in 1989, so 27 years. Most of it on FileMaker. So as Masao was saying, one of the big things to watch out for is actually unstored calculations. Those have to be done on the client side. And so you really want to avoid your solutions allowing the client to do a find in an unstored calculation field. Obviously, you also want to make sure that the fields that the clients can do finds on are indexed, because that's going to give you the best possible speed on the server. It's going to shrink down the list of records and really reduce the amount of network traffic, which is what Mark was pointing out at the very beginning. That really is the balance, because all the data is living on your server, but as the clients are using records and creating found sets, running reports, they are having to download all that data to their local machine or their iPad or iPhone. And whatever you can do to minimize the number of records that they download and also the complexity of the records can help. As Masao noted, I have done some talks in the past, and hopefully those are still available on the community website, talking about how you can, if you have really large data fields, it can actually make sense to split a record so that really huge data is not downloaded all the time to your clients. If you have narrower records, it can really help to minimize the network traffic. I think that's what I'll say for now. Turn it back over to you, Rick.
Yeah, thanks, John. Really appreciate that. Connor and Wade, I'm going to throw this over to you next in whatever order you want to go in. But the question here is, what are some performance troubleshooting tools that you can recommend?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to take that one. I use different tool sets depending on what platform I'm working on. And just for some background, I've done a lot of troubleshooting a FileMaker server. A lot of you have seen me at the tech support booth in previous DevCons, and I've been working in the support infrastructure for close to 10 years before joining the QA team. So this is one of my favorite topics about servers, how to find the problems and fix the bugs. So if we're looking at Windows, of course, you've got Task Manager that you can monitor how much CPU and RAM is being taken up by each of the FileMaker server processes. But then there's also a hidden tool suite that's called sysinternals that is put out by Microsoft that has just a lot of cool stuff too that I'm not sure how many people in our community are aware of. A specific one is called Process Explorer, which gives you a little bit more detail about each of those FileMaker processes. You can actually see the threads that are running and get a little bit more out of each one. On macOS, of course, we've got Activity Monitor to monitor those same types of things. And for anyone who's running Xcode on macOS, there's a developer tool called Inspector, which just, again, goes into a really robust analysis of these processes. On both platforms, we've got probably what is my favorite feature of FileMaker Server is the top call stats log. Of all the performance cases that I've worked on, that's usually my go-to. Let's start here. Let's get first a baseline of all the stats logs, but then for specifically top call stats, not only can you see what types of operations are happening on the server, you can see which of the users are responsible for the slowdown. And I don't know if this is the right time to talk about it, but there's ways to take the table IDs and field IDs that you get out of the top call stats logs, and those can be searched into the XML DDR of your solution to get real field names and real table names. And so that's there's just a whole lot that's there that you can do on your own to sort of figure out where you need to begin your focus.
Great.
Wade, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, Wade, you're muted. There you go.
Hi. Thank you, Kalman. Thank you, Rick. Yeah, so Kalman actually had a very detailed description that besides that, actually in the 19.1 ETS version, actually we offer some more tool inside ourselves. So for example, you can enable to see the remote call timing information. So that will give you some more detailed information about each request response and time spent. And also we offer some other debug and feature flag. So you can, for example, you can toggle the Pro cache on or off. So if you haven't tried download our 19.1 ETS version, I will suggest you download it and try. We would love to see feedback from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Wade. And bring it up to 19.1 and sort of what's coming on the horizon. Well, we can't tell you the exact date. Remember, we are moving much more in an agile fashion. You certainly aren't waiting the year in between server releases, which means we can move a lot faster. And I'll tell you, our philosophy for FileMaker Server is first and foremost, its job is to be stable, right? Its second job is to be performant. And some of the stuff, and Lucy, I'll probably turn this over to you, and then you can probably call on some of your team who is most knowledgeable about this. But some of the things that are coming down the pike in 19.1 that really excite me related to performance are things like use of sharing lock for Hban file access, the parallel index find operations, sorting on the host, and memory-based key comparison during indexing. And all of these things, I think, have the potential to significantly enhance the performance of server. So Lucy, what can you say about that, and who on your team is best to sort of go a little bit deeper on the implications of these things?
Sure, I'm Lucy Chen, VP of Engineering for FileMaker Platforms. I joined 25 years ago, and that was the first year of DevCon. 25 years, a lot have changed. Just today to see John, Thatcher, Clay, Wade, and the crew talking to 1,200 people online bring me to tears for a moment. I want to say that COVID has changed how we think, how we do things, and we have to do it with less people and more work with the difficulties in de-densifying work environment. So time is definitely the critical part, and speed is part of the things that we really want to do our best for the FileMaker platform, for a whole new way to support our customers. So PSR is definitely the key thing. We spend a lot of effort on this, and it's coming soon. It's exciting. We also come with some blogs with it. It's coming often in the next few months. So I want to have Wade E jump in to describe the things that we've done for PSR in 19.1 coming.
So Wade, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Yeah, so the thing is in 19.1 is basically we still keep the PLL code, the page level locking code in there. However, we disable by default in the FileMaker 19 release. So we keep that disabled. I will suggest you probably keep that disabled. And on the other hand, we have tried really hard, try different ways to first to improve the stability and reliability, and try to keep the same level of performance of page level locking. So I'm happy to share with you. So we find out the sharing lock it can achieve a similar kind of performance, and some of them actually in internal tests that could be even better than page level locking. Yeah. So besides that, we have tried some different things, like we try to facilitate like a parallel index find and sort on server, and we even try to like a parallel sort and like a compare multiple level key in memory instead of in disk base. So we have tried quite a lot of these things. So again, like I suggested before, please, if you haven't tried the ETS version, please sign up and download it and give us feedback. So Clay, do you want to add a couple more colors about the sort or other things? Thank you.
You're muted, Clay.
Yeah, I guess seeing some questions about what parallel finds are, but or sorts are. It's basically just taking the list of records and having threads sort different sections of them and doing. It's basically a merge sort on using multiple threads, and we've been playing around with this technology over the different years and stuff like that, and we found different issues because everything's interrelated. The Hbam changes that Wade was mentioning about doing the sharing lock. There's kind of like 4 levels of locking that have been in Hbam over its lifetime now. There was the exclusive lock that only one thing at all could work in Hbam. Then there was the file level locks. And then we went all the way down to page level locking, which was a very fine grained locking, which was very complex. But now we've the sharing lock that Wade is talking about is kind of a halfway point between file locking and page level locking. It does a sharing lock on the file level. And we found out that it's a lot simpler process. And when page level locking was done first, we thought we had to go down and do this very low grain locking. But we found out that the performance of FileMaker is actually nearly the same as page level locking if we just go to the simpler sharing lock. So we're making the code simpler. And when you make things simpler, like Nick and Mark have been mentioning, simple is faster, no matter what you're doing. So we're trying to go through and make things simpler there. The sorting we've tried around, the sorting to do on parallel, to have multiple threads doing sorting, we need the sharing lock at least, or page level locking. We implemented it a long time ago, and the 2 levels of locking, the slower level locking stuff, you didn't get any performance improvement. So we've been waiting for Hbam to do that. The sorting on server has been another thing that has been laying around and has been requiring things like parallel sorting on the server. So we've had these different things laying around all these different times. And something that we've done different now in the ETS program that you've heard about is that we basically have put everything inside the product now. And the ETS people can turn on things on and off to try out different combinations and see how it affects their solutions, because it's kind of hard for us to figure out everything that everyone is doing. And having a larger testing group going through to say, oh, this person A may have, parallel sorting is working great on me, but for person B, it really is slows down completely. So then that goes back to Connor, and Connor has to figure out why what's going on and why there's a difference there. So
and Connor thanks you for that.
Yes.
Hey Clay, I've got a couple of follow-up questions. People asking, what is Hbam? Can you give a real quick explanation of what that is?
Like Jen mentioned, you can go back to some previous talks that we've given. The Hbam is the how we store everything inside FileMaker. There's one FileMaker file. It's a big B tree. You can look up B tree is a very common computer storage mechanism, and we split this B tree across all these 4K blocks as a FileMaker file is built in. And Hbam is basically the layer that takes the B tree is like a tree, so data is stored at leaves, and you have all these branches, and each branch has a path to it. And so, like record A may be on table A, the table A branch, in the record 3 branch, and then in the twig of 14 is where the field is stored. And Hbam is the thing that figures out these addresses, these branches and twigs, and where the leaf is actually stored, which block on disk that thing is stored in. And when you have multiple people accessing this stuff, you have to have a cop saying who can talk to which block at which time, who can make writes to these blocks, who can do reads to these blocks. And that's the different locking levels that we've been playing around, which PLL had a cop basically almost at every leaf, where the sharing lock has like one main cop and 3 little ones running around doing other things, which is simpler. And the previous locking one, just had, one manager that said yes and no one at a time, so which is the slowest thing. So Hbam is basically the low-level storage mechanism that's underneath everything.
Okay, great, thanks. Now, Yi, I'm going to shoot this over to you, and Wade may have some comments here as well. But I have a question here about what are some performance enhancements that are coming to FileMaker Cloud?
I think we see the one major issue is the completeness of data centers. So currently we just Frankfurt online on July 28th. So if if your purchase order is in the European areas, you should move to the Frankfurt data center. That should give a better performance. I saw one question is about the customer in UK. They probably did a trial before the Frankfurt data center is available. So I will suggest them to try again, since that's just online like last week. And we are doing other improvement. I think we already mentioned a lot of enhancement is happening on 19.1, and all the server enhancement cloud will have all the same enhancement as well. And also we are improving the uploading speed.
Great. Wade, do you have anything to add to that? You're muted, Wade.
Yeah, thank you. So the thing is, we understand the latency issue is important. So actually, we are investigate potentially different techniques to improve it. Yeah. So we are actively investigating. Maybe say we leverage some kind of compression or better compression or other things to optimize the traffic, the round trip. And I would highly suggest we have a blogger talking about to optimize the solution. So to cut down your round trip traffics. So if your solution use less round trip traffic between client and the cloud server, then for sure the speed will speed up your solution. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. You know, following up on hardware, and I'll throw this out to anyone on the panel. Over the years, we've often heard of people saying, "Well, gosh, I just have my server running on a Mac Mini under my desk, and you know, it's also got other services like mail server and so on." And our advice has always been, if you've got something business critical, that is a value, and you should dedicate hardware to that. So maybe, Mark, I'll start with you on what are your thoughts on sort of the hardware that you should dedicate to your FileMaker server?
So I'm certainly not the best candidate to answer hardware questions because I don't deal with them very often, but I think that's somewhat telling. You know, my impression is that whereas it used to be we had dedicated servers, and that was the standard on-prem, as we move to the cloud, or even as clients have virtualized their own infrastructures, it's become clear to me that the separation of hardware really doesn't exist anymore. I mean, there's shared data storage systems and they're being virtually segregated. And so even if the mail server is on another box, it's still using the same storage tool. And odds are that tool has moved to a fiber-based, you know, a back end or has a much larger plane. And so as a result, the performance improvement is getting better all the time. It feels to me like that's important. And certainly in large solutions with lots of data or lots of users, what kind of hardware or resources, I should say, you've allocated in your virtual machine to service that particular solution and box is important. And if that particular operating system on that particular virtual machine is doing all sorts of other things, then you're going to definitely, you know, start to fight for those cores and fight for the memory. And I guess you could argue fight for some of the I/O to that storage. But it feels to me, at least, that you know, for the average solution out there, for the typical medium to small business that's running a FileMaker solution, hardware is rarely a major obstacle unless it's dramatically under provisioned. So yeah, the Mac Mini on your desk for a group of 25 users probably not going to be good if they're really relying on that solution all day. But if they have a reasonably well provisioned Windows virtual machine that has adequate resources, you know, to the minimum or slightly better than what Claris recommends, odds are if you're having bottlenecks in your solution and it's an average solution, it may not be the hardware to point a finger at.
Hey, Nick, what has been your experience on the hardware side as far as the impact?
I think it's very difficult. The reason that this question has been coming up for years and years and years, and no one ever gives a particularly straight answer on it, is because there are so many variables. So the approach that we took was to develop a tool to load test. And the load testing method we're using, which is just using perform script on server without waiting for these things to conclude, so that each session that runs is essentially a virtual user, is I think the same one that is used internally at FileMaker. And if you've got a certain setup that you know performs in a certain way, if If you run DS benchmark or something that does a similar thing, I think other people have produced similar tools on it, look at the data you get, and then try running the same set of tests on another possible provision, you can then get a very clear idea of whether the other provision is going to provide better or worse performance and the extent of it. And of course, with, as Mark's saying, with virtual boxes, you can tweak, you can decide to pay for a bit more resource. With a well-designed system, as a system that's actually been designed to run well on WAN, you can do quite a lot with a relatively modest hardware footprint. The performance of FileMaker Server now, compared to the performance we were seeing with, for example, FileMaker 13, is immeasurably better. I mean, it has got significantly better over the last few years, and obviously additional loads being put on it with additional features and stability, etc. But it's so much better than it was in, say, 2014. So ultimately, I agree with Mark that the hardware isn't really the problem it used to be, but just taking a basic engineering approach and saying, let's just test it, let's measure it, let's see what it'll do, then you're actually working with some facts as opposed to merely opinion.
Great, thanks. I've got a question coming in, probably to one of our internal server engineers, and it's asking, are there differences in performance between using Linux versus Mac or Windows? Do we have any information there? Let's assume that, all intents and purposes, the performance of whatever service or box or VM you're using is equal. Anyone want to take that internally?
I can take that.
Okay.
I think we see comparable performance, and I think the Linux server is kind of established, pretty stable, and I think for all the engineers working with Linux, we find that very attractive. So I think customers should really try out the Linux server solution. They'll be pretty impressed. So we have the ETS for on-premise Linux. So I would suggest all the people listening should try this out. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Yi. And just a reminder, when we shipped FileMaker 19, we did release a developer preview of Linux server. So if you already have a license for server, you can download that and play with it. We have had an additional release just a while back, a few weeks back. Our intention is by the end of summer that we will have a fully certified shipping version of Linux server, which is just the beginning of where we're heading with our Linux server. You may be aware that, of course, our Linux server was first ported for FileMaker Cloud, and so we're leveraging those same technologies. We did have a question that came as the run-up to Engage that came up on this panel page. And it says, what is the difference in terms of performance between defining a field as a stored calculation type and defining it as auto enter field with the same calculation? And then they caveat unchecked is do not replace existing value in field. So in other words, what event trigger the calculation of a stored calc field to what event triggers the calculation, the stored calc to reevaluate versus what events trigger the auto field reevaluated? And then there's a note here that they add is this question is about calculation fields that can be stored. So is that a John or a Clay question or someone else on the panel?
I guess I can give a quick stab at it. The calculated fields are all based off the dependency of what other fields it depends on. And that's what triggers it. If one of these other fields change, then it'll be recalculated. And there's been many talks about the dependency tree, and that can get pretty complex. I think there's one called Shaking the Dependency Tree. Just search for that. And that's what triggers the calculated fields. And they can be triggered anytime a record is updated. So the record actually, whenever a any field changes, and the calc has to change it. The auto enter fields, you pretty much just have to look at the auto enter panel and see, and it kind of mentions when the calc will be updated, whether it's being updated at creation time or when the record gets modified. It isn't dependent on other fields changing. It usually requires some type of special action by the user to cause the auto enter calc to be repulled. I mean, lookups are based in there, so that is kind of one trigger. If you have a lookup auto enter, that may cause it. But usually you have to do a modify record or create record or some other specific operation. Now, the calcs that are actually performed are identical. When the calc is actually executed, there is no difference between an auto enter calc and a calculated field. It's just the trigger points.
Rick, could I just come in on that?
Sure, Nick, go ahead.
The question is alluding to a point that is a really good performance tip, which is to use these auto enter fields rather than calculated fields. Certainly, the thing that I got years ago from, I think, Bruce Robertson was putting in a tickler, and I've known many other people do a very similar thing. So essentially, if you add a very simple field, which is going to be something like itself plus 1, say, and you include that within the expression in the auto enter field, then it's quite easy to make these auto enter fields update automatically whenever you want them to do. You can do it in different ways, but basically it's creating an artificial thing that gives it that little stimulus to tickle it so it does actually update.
I guess that is a performance technique that you can use. So we were talking about stored calculated fields, but one of the big performance problems is unstored calculated fields because they can't be stored. What you can do with an auto enter field is basically get a stored version of a calculated field, just as Nick mentioned about the tickling mechanism. It's just that the problem you have to worry about, and you have to think about this with your solution, is that you need to know when you need to do the tickling to update those values. So you could actually have a complex calc based on related fields that would normally be unstored as a calculated field, but you could put it as an auto enter calc, and as long as you know when those related fields change or whenever you need to update the value, you can go through and tickle, force the calc to the auto enter calc to get executed again, and it'll put the value into the stored field. So then your indexes will be created, and your searches and finds and display of data will be a lot quicker too. But you can't really come up with a very general mechanism for knowing when to do that tickle. You have to know your solution, how the relationships are set up, when the records change and stuff like that. But that is one of the techniques to really speed up a solution, is how to turn an unstored calc into a stored calc by making it an auto enter and you controlling the dependencies of when it gets triggered.
Thanks a lot, Clay. We are coming to the end of this. You can see our screen coming up. I would really like to thank our panelists and the time they have spent preparing for this and participating in it. It is quite a value. I think that Rosemary said we will post to the community all of the rich resources. We have a number of under the hood sessions that have been recorded over the years by John Thatcher and Clay Makel and Andrew Paulson. Maybe we even have some out there from Chris Krim. Those are always great resources. They're on our YouTube channel, and as reference, I would definitely recommend those. And hope you join us in 15 minutes. Our next panel is driving customers towards modern design experience. And with that, I'd like to thank you again. And again, thank you to the panelists. And John, it is so great to see you. A lot of us are just thrilled that you could join us here. So thanks a lot, all.